things anymore. You guys might know who Balaji is. He's a partner at Andreessen Horowitz. His quote about this is very clear and very good, that money and bits are how you coordinate groups. And when you combine them, especially with a way to own parts of these companies like equity crowdfunding does, you get new types of movements, new types of organization. I think that's the whole point. This is how equity crowdfunding changes the world, is that equity crowdfunding plus Bitcoin, plus the internet platforms that already exist, I think that allows the truest economic democracy the world has ever seen. This is not a small change. This is a qualitative shift in how people relate to money and relate to power and capital and entrepreneurship. To me, this is an amazing development. I think if you believe in democracy and freedom, fairness, the American dream, and human empowerment, this is super exciting. This is a great thing. You know, if you're, just like everyone loves Uber except Yellow Cab, every person should love equity crowdfunding except the entrenched industries that have been protected either through large, like they're too big to compete with, or the government regulatory capture or anything like that. Those are the only people who hate Bitcoin and equity crowdfunding. To me, that's how it changes the world. And I don't think anyone really understands this or sees this coming. I mean, God knows I don't. I just listen to smart people on Twitter and I put this together from that. But anyway, those are my thoughts. Thank you. Of course, dude. Yeah, please.
It wasn't a question. You gave an example of the company that was doing what you were discussing. Can I go back to those numbers? Is that possible, or can I just give them to you? You had 196,000 sterling up there, which is about 300,000 and change in US dollars.
Right.
And you had 5,000, for want of a better word, contributors, investors. But let's just say they're shareholders, because we're talking equity, right?
Right. That was Kickstarter, but
okay. So the listing requirements on some of the smaller electronic exchanges, wherever you go in the world, make that example a tradable security. In other words, the criteria are number of shareholders, capital base, and turnover. So looking at those numbers, that's a publicly traded undertaking, should you choose to file it somewhere. So it stops being capital formation, it starts being big business that has exit strategy attached to it. Or can be.
Absolutely, possibly, yeah.
Okay.
My point is not that equity crowdfunding is going to replace capitalism or going to make profit-making companies obsolete. Of course not. That's ridiculous. Like, by no means do I say that. I'm saying I think there's a third type. Right now, there's basically two ways to organize a business. You have a profit-making enterprise, or you have a nonprofit. I think there's a legal movement to create something called a benefit corporation.
Yeah, the B Corps, yeah.
Exactly. I think this is I didn't want to talk about benefit corps because I felt like it was getting too far off track. You can think of this like a benefit corp.
Yeah.
I think it's a very similar idea.
Okay.
What's the most compelling thing about crowdfunding to me is, let's say you have a Pfizer and they make billions on drugs and someone can come up with some sort of cure that the institutions are just stopping them from bringing to market. Crowdfunding, like you said, allows for things that could potentially be cures to come to the stage because now the people are funding the people. It's no longer banks or VCs that might have shares in these large corporations. To me, I think that's the power of crowdfunding as well, is there's a valley of death, which is the funding gap for these tech companies, these biotech companies, and this is something that's really going to help them bring cures to like maybe diseases and everything else. Is that kind of how you see it too?
Yeah, I mean, sort of. That's not like, you're talking about a very specific situation about crowdfunding filling different gaps. That's what I was talking about at the beginning of the speech. You're looking about what exists now and you're seeing a straight line to that, and you're not wrong. I'm trying to envision a totally different type of future. Like, imagine in 2005, if I told you that 3 billion people around the world would be on the internet with a device in their hands. Or I told you 2001. I mean, at that point, you'd be like, okay, but you wouldn't understand all the implications. None of us did, God knows. I would have bought Apple then too if I could figure it out, but I'm not smart. So, I mean, I'm trying to, the point of this speech is to explain what are the potential qualitative leaps that equity crowdfunding could create, not how are biotech companies going to use equity crowdfunding to get to an IPO or something? You know, you're not wrong. It's just this is sort of a different vision.
You did this interesting analysis about how much you think you're worth to social media companies and how they could in turn pay you. But it strikes me that's only half the equation, because the other part is how much value are you deriving or someone else deriving from them. So, you know, how much are you using Twitter, LinkedIn to drive book sales? But I think the example you made doesn't take that into account.
You're 100%. So I did not mean to stand up here and you're right, and I was unclear. I did not mean to stand up here and imply that I don't take a ton of value from Facebook and Twitter. The reason that they're so popular is because they create immense value for people, immense. But my point is they capture a huge amount of that value. Not all of it by any stretch, but a lot, right? And my point is not there's no room for that company. My point is, what if that company existed to distribute all of the value it captures, or the vast majority, to its users, right? It doesn't mean the other company can't exist, but imagine if there are two Facebooks starting at the same time. One is Zuckerberg's Facebook, one is Changebook, and it pays its users. And it's gonna be tough for Facebook to compete, you know? And it changes the way the company interacts with its users. Like I said, I think this is a new type of business model, but no, by no means do I. You're absolutely right. Twitter creates a ton of value for me. I'm not trying to imply that Twitter's not stealing from anybody. They're not evil. Facebook's not evil, by no means. But I'm saying there's another way to do Facebook that might have a major competitive advantage over current Facebook. See?
Couldn't that be, I mean, this word I never want to associate with crowdfunding personally, but like MLM, that stuff is not what you're talking about when you pay the bill. Yeah, that's
no
terrible.
Pyramid schemes.
Yeah,
No,
terrible.
No, this is Facebook paying its users by paying them at, like, they're charging whatever for ads, there's operating costs, and then the rest gets distributed to users. That's it. There's no one's paying in to use the network. No.
Perfect.
No. All right.
Aren't you kind of saying also that in order for social media to be effective, it has to have critical mass, right? And
Any network.
yeah, and through
One fax machine is worthless. A million have value, right?
And through crowdfunding, not only are you getting money, you're also creating a really
You're doing a launch, is what it is. You're combining two things in one, right? This is just one example. You can give a million examples, but I mean that's why. Why do you think Kickstarter is now effectively a pre-order platform?
Right.
Because it's a launch platform for consumer products, right? That's what it's become, and it's fantastic. It works really well doing that. And absolutely, I think crowdfunding campaigns can be used as not just ways to raise money, but as ways to create that initial seed for networks, so that you're not starting with 1 or 2 or 3, you're starting with 10,000. Then network effects can compound rapidly, as opposed to you get to the hockey stick quick instead of taking 3 years or whatever.
because they have to invest in it.
Right, exactly. And the investors just not even use it, but to tell everyone.
Right, exactly.
Right? Because then they become a node within the network, and
Right.
they make more money or whatever, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, one last question. So I'd be curious, and if you know the answer to this, I'd love to know it, but did Ghost prepare for a while before they launched? Because
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. He didn't just get up on Kickstarter and say, hey, I've got this vision of something. No, dude. I mean, you can do that. There aren't many people who are so persuasive that they're going to separate people from their money without any sort of, demo or anything like that. No. Ghost had a working model. It had a ton. He had really good marketing because it was a great product. It's easy to market great products, and he had working models. He had demos. He had sent. It's a basic Kickstarter launch. He had sent demos to Mashable and TechCrunch, and it got covered everywhere.
Sure.
Right? This is not. The one thing I didn't talk about. Look, equity crowdfunding is going to allow anyone the ability to compete. Most people can't execute shit. right? So it's not like all of a sudden this goofy hippie who is sitting in a coffee shop complaining about how there's no fairness is now going to be running a multinational that's taking down Facebook. The dude's sitting there because he's worthless, right? All right, that's the reality. It's easy to come up with good ideas. It's harder to persuade people to back them, and it's really fucking hard to execute. That's, by no means is them saying, all of a sudden, all these amazing companies are going to spring up, and the supply of entrepreneurs is finite.
Yes.
The supply of ideas is not. And now, the supply of capital is much broader and much bigger, and also has different interests, right? Capital from Goldman Sachs has a very different purpose or different interest than capital from 10,000 people in Nebraska, right?
Yeah, and in fact, I think Mark said it earlier that there needs to be some level of, you have to be squeaky clean in crowdfunding, because the thing is, the way it's currently happening is one person has a great idea one day, they hear about Kickstarter, and then they're launching their campaign the next week, right? I mean, as an industry...
That's the problem with Kickstarter. There's that's the fundamental flaw of Kickstarter. Why I think if equity crowdfunding works, I would short the hell out of Kickstarter if you could.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, Oculus Rift taught us that, I hope, if anything. Why would I? No one will ever, once equity crowdfunding works, no one will ever back anything in a rewards-based crowdfunding situation that could be a big company and could exit, because why would I? Why would I give you money for nothing when I can give you money and own part of the company? It's not an option now, so people can play that. Later on, they can't play that. It's different things.
So I would like to hear you talk either now or at some later time. What you're describing, this network effect, I think it's the prisoner's dilemma that's always been there, where people who are not bound by any rules always make the wrong decision. So, like, you're talking about Facebook, but the same thing was true with broadcast radio, right? The broadcasters make money from having listeners, and the listeners don't get that money. And the same is true with Comcast today. I won't use any bad words, but
we all hate cable companies. You can use bad words. Unless some of you own them.
They make money because we're all network users, and we don't have a way.
They make money because we pay them.
Yeah, but we pay them because we're sort of we're unorganized as users. So there's no organized way to make them behave.
No, it's because the transaction costs of information were high. We're going into a very different world, and this is a different discussion. But I think the quick answer is, I might be getting the question wrong. The quick answer is, a lot of these business models are going to have new business models, and new businesses are going to have to emerge, because especially media companies, but almost every sector, you'd be hard pressed to name a sector where this doesn't apply. The assumptions underlying the business models are built on the 20th century, pre-digital information, pre-information age. And when the transaction cost of information goes to zero, then how you monetize and where you monetize become different things, right? And essentially, you either own the content or you own the pipes, right? So the two companies that are going to win in media going forward are going to be people like me who create content, and people like Google who distribute it. Distributors used to be Time Warner or those sorts of companies. I think they're going to be, I think Google Fiber and those sorts of things. The reason Google bought all the dark fiber in America in the late 90s and early 2000s is because they're trying to build their own network to get around cable companies. That's their long-term strategy, whether they admit it or not. Because once they can do that, then they essentially own they own the pipe to the user instead of the cable companies, right? And so what you're paying for with cable and what you were paying with broadcast, there's no way to connect those people. Let's put it this way.
Well, you just mean there's no current way, and that's.
There didn't used to be, but now you can connect the creator to the consumer, and the middleman can make very little, but because of massive scale, can become hugely rich. But essentially, you have to create new companies that understand these economics, because none of the 20th century companies do. That's the way they're built. companies don't change, new companies come along and out-compete them. You know, I mean, how many examples? IBM's the only one I can think of that changed, and even then, they can't change fast enough, you know?
I guess what I'm saying is, if you can invent this new anti-Facebook, then you can invent the new anti-Comcast.
That's the thing, it's not anti-Facebook.
Well, it's not, I'm using that.
Right.
To avoid thinking of what the right word would be.
Yeah, I don't know
But
what it is either, but-
The Facebook that is built for its users and the Comcast that's built for its users are, I think, the same concept. And it's an interesting question why we
Yeah,
don't.
no, I see what you're
exist
saying.
today.
Okay, so distribution's a little tougher. Distribution requires physical infrastructure.
It is somewhat tougher, but it's the same basic issue, I think.
Yeah, I think once you get high enough, it is. It is. It becomes a little difficult with physical stuff like that. Longer timelines. There's a lot of regulatory issues. There's other things that come in. Facebook, you know, the new Facebook is like that.
Yeah.
I honestly think Google is going to be the one that's going to disrupt cable companies, but you know, I don't know. What do I know? I don't know.
So what do you think happens to traditional finance players like Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley?
I mean, you
Control this for 100 years.
I don't know if you guys follow Mark Andreessen, but you should. Mark's very smart. I mean, with a head like that, as big as he has, he better be smart, right? Mark has this saying that software is eating the world. And everything that can be done by software will be. And there's very, very little in finance that cannot be done by a software program. Not everything. Software program's never going to be able to sign a new, that's not true, you probably sign a new client. Obviously they can't have human relationships. There's any number of things where the really brilliant people in finance are still going to excel. Most of the middle to lower end players, I mean, they'll go the way of any number of industries that have been disrupted by software. I mean, I can't wait for the day where accounting is a service instead of a fucking person I have to pay, you know? And I think finance is going to go the same way. Good?
Thank you.
All right, thank you.